It's time to start rallying around the nominee.
Team Bush is a bitter pill to swallow, but you know what? You get back up and you help the man that won, and you make sure that we stop Hillary Clinton.
Well, it wasn't quite the endorsement, but considering the source, it is a big deal. Joining us now to analyze from Washington, a writer with the Weekly Standard, Michael Graham. Michael, let's start with that, if you don't mind. George P. Bush, emphasis on Bush, says vote for Trump.
And, you know, what I like about this is that it shows that there's a real divide among sincere, honest people about what to do about Donald Trump. Obviously, the Bush family didn't even show up for the convention. And now you have a rising star, you could argue, in the Bush universe who's out supporting, if we shall say, Trump. And I'll tell you what bothers me the most, Eric, about the entire conversation. Is you got two groups of people insist that the other side are total dirtbags for either not supporting Trump or for supporting Trump. No. People of goodwill and who are trying to do the right thing can come to very different conclusions, as is obviously happening.
How is it the right conclusion if Hillary Clinton is elected president, if you're a conservative or a GOP, or how is that the right conclusion?
How is voting for a big government liberal from New York who supports Planned Parenthood and gave money to Democrats?
Well, that's Hillary you're talking about, I assume.
No, I'm talking about Donald Trump, obviously. And this is my point.
I understand. I've heard all the arguments. I know where he came from. I do that. I've known him for 15 years. This is always the killer, the one that just destroys that never Trump argument. Hillary Clinton will fill the Supreme Court with liberals. She'll also appoint federal judges with a liberal bent to them. And if you want your kids, and George P. Bush's kids, and him and his kids, if you want a liberal judicial branch of government forever, then vote for Hillary.
And that's a very powerful argument. And for some Republicans, it's enough for them to get past their personal
It should be for everyone.
Their principle.
Michael, it should be for everyone.
It's not enough.
It's a bilateral decision. It's not. There's not three choices here. It's vote for her, and if you don't, you're going to end up vote for him. If you don't vote for him, it's a vote for her.
Well, Steve Haywood at the Weekly Standard has a really interesting piece about what they give an election and no one shows up. The power of the unchecked box. It is possible for a democracy to offer people choices that are simply unacceptable, and that happens. And the only way that you can
other choice, Michael, for conservative is Hillary Clinton. You don't have a third choice. This guy, Evan McMullin, really? How many states is he going to get on? 20? He can't be your nominee.
I will say this. Right now, he's probably leading in Utah, given how bad Trump's numbers are. I mean, if you think of Utah, Arizona, and Georgia as swing states,
Michael,
then maybe Trump is going to do well
he's a Mormon. Please, I know he has any sort of traction, and I'm guessing I know where that came from, too, given his Mormon background. You used to work for Pat Buchanan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I am a long-time Jesse Jackson Republican. Stay out the bushes. I've been fighting the establishment.
WWPBD. What would Pat Buchanan do?
Well, Pat Buchanan would do what he thought was right rather than what he thought was politically expedient.
Guess what he said?
Then he thinks that, if he thinks that it's right to support a guy like Donald Trump, then I get that. But there's nothing wrong with
That's what he said. Support the GOP nominee.
The no political party is entitled to your viewers' votes. They are entitled as American citizens with this precious gift of a vote. If I gave Hillary my vote, I think of it like a brick. And if I give Hillary my vote, she'll use that brick to build a wall of secrecy for behind which she will rule like Emperor Palpatine, sending out her will. And if I give Donald Trump that brick, he will use it to beat a baby seal to death live on national television. I've got a crook. I've got a kook. I'm sorry. You've left millions of Americans out, which is why Donald Trump's numbers among college-educated white voters are so awful.
That not voting for Donald Trump has to, by definition, hand this election to Hillary Clinton. There's no way around it. You can't sit it out and hope he somehow pulls it out. And by the way, if he does, then what are you going to do?
Well, I'm not voting for Hillary Clinton, so that means that by your logic, I'm voting for Donald Trump. So I foiled you there, but I have this simple argument.
No, you're a Republican, right? You're a registered Republican, right?
Well, I don't know, does Virginia have registration by party? I don't know. I'm from the South, so no one ever registered by party. But let me just say this. People who say that voting against X is the same as voting...
I got to go. Supreme Court will hear cases on the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, immigration. It's going to be so important in the next 10 years of the court, and you are going to make that a liberal court. All you never Trumpers. I hope you deal with that. Because we'll be talking about it a lot on TV, like how left the country's gone.
You had 15 guys and gals you could have put up. You picked the one guy that chases away 10 million voters.
Michael, thank you very much. Good debate. I got to go. Thank you. Up next, Iran executes a top nuclear scientist who was the subject of emails on Hillary Clinton's private server. Right back with that. a nuclear scientist who was convicted of spying for the United States. Shahram Amiri defected to the USA, but later returned to Iran in 2010 under murky circumstances. And in another twist in this case, he was also the subject of some of the emails made public during the Hillary Clinton private server scandal.
You mentioned the Iranian scientist that was recently executed. Now, of course, I'm not going to comment on what he may or may not have done for the United States government. But in the emails that were on Hillary Clinton's private server, there were conversations among her senior advisors about this gentleman. That goes to show just how reckless and careless her decisions was to put that kind of highly classified information on a private server. I think her judgment is not suited to keep this country safe.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington, Cliff May, the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and from Houston, Arash Aramesh, a national security.
2010. This is when he was still in the United States, when he was still here, quote unquote, cooperating with us. Hillary Clinton and the State Department announced that this guy is here on his own free will. He can leave. What was his story? His story was that he was kidnapped in Saudi Arabia by the U.S. intelligence and the Saudi intelligence and brought here and coerced for information. When the Iranian regime arrested his wife and put a lot of pressure on his family, and this guy got a little homesick and saw this sort of extreme pressure and violence coming from the Iranian regime that is well known and well documented for its human rights abuses, he just left and went back. As soon as he returned to Iran, he was arrested and he was in prison until just a week ago, and then he was executed.
Right, but Cliff, if he had kept that story alive, and if we hadn't refuted that story in certain emails, then maybe he would still be alive.
Well, that's hard to say. Look, I think there are a few things you can conclude. Objectively, was it wrong for Hillary Clinton to have a personal server? I think objectively we have to agree it was. Was it reckless for her to have a personal server? That's more subjective, but I would agree with Tom Cotton. It was a reckless thing to do. Did any emails that she had over this server contribute in any way to the fact that Shahram Amiri was hanged? I think that's purely speculative. I don't think we can conclude that.
Okay, do you think there's, Arash, do you think there's more? I'm clearly over 33,000, or even the 30,000 she hasn't turned over. There were a lot of names mentioned. If I'm one of those people mentioned, and I'm a spy, boy, I'm a little nervous now.
You know, I have a lot more faith, at least, in the abilities of the State Department and other law enforcement and intelligence agencies to go through these emails and redact names. What I do have a problem with, and unfortunately doesn't get a lot of coverage, is people like Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, or a traitor named Snowden, who goes out and publishes thousands and thousands, especially WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who is now after Hillary Clinton.
But that is an inherent risk. That is an inherent risk of having your own server that some outside hacker can hack in and read what you're reading. Writing.
As Clifford said, I mean that's a different point. The question at hand here is whether this sort of action and this sort of maneuvering puts Americans at risk. And what really put Americans at risk was after WikiLeaks, when names of thousands of people who come to U.S. embassies around the world to do sort of deep cover or behind the scenes sort of dialogue with American diplomats and American political officers there were published. And this sort of irresponsible behavior by WikiLeaks and a treasonous act, just what Snowden did.
But Cliff, isn't that part of the problem?
We have very short-term memories. But just one last point. I mean, this sort of conspiracy thinking, trying to link everything to Hillary Clinton. I mean, some people would pretty soon have you believe that she was behind the Kennedy assassination.
No, but this has always been. This is not a conspiracy link,
Hillary Clinton. I mean, it just has to stop at some point.
Cliff, I'll let you take this, but that is one of the major risks of having your own private email server. If it's not as secure as a State Department server, you risk outside hackers getting information, period, right? What am I missing?
No question this was a bad idea for her to have this server. I think people recognize that. I think that shows up in the polls in terms of her ratings on honesty and on trust. All of that is true. I don't think this particular occurrence is going to change the polls at all or change perceptions at all. But I want to make sure we don't miss the major point here. This guy was hanged because it is believed by the Iranians that he gave information to the Americans on Iran's nuclear program. If that nuclear program is peaceful, as the Iranians insist, then why in the world would they hang him for having provided information on it? That is the key point, and it shows that the agreement made with Iran is fundamentally flawed. And I don't believe the Iranians are abiding by it. Look, they've got a justice system that has no justice in it. Yeah, that's just when this was announced that he was being hanged. What did the Iranian spokesman say? That America is their enemy number one. And the great Satan.
They've never said anything else. They've never said anything else other than we are the enemy, and that we're the ones that they would love to see eradicated along with Israel.
I think that's the most important point.
Iran had a dangerous nuclear program, and Cliff is right. Iran had a dangerous nuclear program about a year away from breakout capacity and capability. And guess what? We should thank President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the State Department for putting together a deal that has put a stop to this dangerous Iranian nuclear program.
Why? Because you think now, Arash, now you think they're going to abide by the sanctions of the deal?
We know they're not abiding by many of their obligations. The missile launches are that.
That's not true. That is
the missile launches, as you know. Look, let me get to this point. Let me get to this point, and you can answer it, Arash. Sure. We know that this agreement gives Iran a patient pathway to nuclear weapons in about a dozen years. That is a mistake because we cannot believe that this regime will be different in 10 years. It will still consider us the great Satan, and it will still want genocide for Israel.
Before we go.
The regime in Tehran is a terrible regime. We imposed heavy sanctions. We brought them back to the negotiating table on their knees. And guess what? According to most observers and nuclear watchdogs, including the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran, those bad guys have lived up to their commitments.
Well, all right, we're going to have to leave it right there. A lot of this stuff is up for debate, though. I will tell you that debate is not over. Gentlemen, thank you very much. When we